Hello and welcome to Apple with the Doc. My normal podcast usually goes into the newest, the latest, the greatest in health science, and I break it down, give you a little bit more information from a doctor's perspective. This podcast that you're listening to now, I dive deep into one article titled Gender Inequality Linked to Deaths Under Age of 5. Trigger warning, I guess, if you're into those. But again, thank you for listening, and let's get started. So in this podcast, I normally do go over the news. However, in this one, I think it might be beneficial to actually go into an article that I see here on CNN. Now, this article I found in the health section, and it has to deal with the social sciences. And so the title of this article is Gender Inequality Linked to Death of Girls Under 5 New Analysis Says. Now, it's important to note that the social sciences, while they still have the term science in them, many of their theories often include conditional words such as may, could, perhaps, possibly. Those words that don't assert straight up confidence into what they're saying. And so I thought it might be beneficial to actually point this out, especially in this article. Especially when articles you see that it says like avocados could be beneficial to birth control or something like that. Something outrageous like that. That's not an actual thing, by the way, but to take that as an example, I use the word could. It's not something that's actually something that exudes confidence. Nothing that says, "Oh, experimentally, this is what it is." So let's just I'll just go ahead and break this down, this article a little bit down into what the paragraphs are saying and what exactly it's saying. Because I've read quite a few social sciences papers, and a lot of them, they don't really back up anything that they're saying. And so this article begins with CNN. In countries where women face more unequal treatment in society, young girls have a lower chance of survival, a new analysis finds. And so it goes into talking about how certain countries, they are not exactly gender equality. And this could apply to any country, actually, if you believe that there's a difference in the genders. However, this doesn't exactly say anything about gender versus sex. When I read this article, it just states gender from what I'm gathering, not the actual sex of the person. And in science, gender and sex are different. It doesn't matter who you read. I find that the right, almost all the time, conflates sex and gender. And the left sometimes conflates it, but they often just stick with gender. So if you identify as a female, that's your gender. And it kind of gets a little dicey when you start just saying gender and sex. So you identify as a woman, but then you're not a woman because your sex is not a woman. And that's what the right tends to use. My personal opinion, I really don't care. I mean, I believe in a meritocracy-based system. I don't care if you're a woman or a man or a pixikin. It doesn't really matter to me. If I offend you, I'm sorry. If you prefer a certain pronoun, just tell me. But anyways, enough of this, that PC stuff. And so you just have this blatant statement that's out there. And so the next little bit goes into how girls are gender inequality linked to more deaths than expected among girls under the age of 5 compared to boys of the same age, especially in lower and middle income countries, says the study published on Tuesday. And so let's look into exactly what this study actually is. It's published in the BJM, which I believe stands for British Medical Journal, which is a printed journal that's located in, it's a peer-reviewed journal, sorry. So a peer-reviewed journal is actually looking into this. And now this study was actually done as an ecological analysis. So in terms of studies, an ecological analysis is not something that's conclusive. If you want to talk about conclusivity, it's very, very minimum. If you look at a spectrum, experimental is where you go and say X proves Y. Whereas if you look at ecological study, it's on the complete end of the other side of the spectrum, and where it states that X could lead to Y. But we need to do more analysis, and we need to do more studying, and in order to actually say something that's very conclusive. And now this is where something is actually very difficult, because in science we hold something that's testing humans to be very unethical. If I were put in this perspective, the Nazis, to go into the boogeyman Nazis, they were actually really bad, and they actually did do human testing. One of these things is exemplified where if you look up Clara cells, they're these cells that are found in the lung, and they were initially found in Nazi Germany by some Nazi by the last name of Clara. And there's a huge debate of whether or not Clara cells should be renamed, but I believe they should be, but that's just my opinion. So Clara cells, there are these cells that come in, and they're like glorified macrophages that you find within the lung. And what they did was, this Clara guy, after the Jews were gassed within the gas chambers, he would dissect the cadavers of these Jews that were killed and do sections of the lungs, and he would discover Clara cells that way. And so we wouldn't do something like that today in biology. We would do in vitro and ex vivo studies, under glass and outside of glass studies. We would do these studies, and then we'll take a section of tissue and expose it to the elements or whatever we're testing, and then we can deduce a conclusive statement that way. Now, sociology, you deal with human nature. You can't really say X, Y, and Z. You can't really say, oh, humans are this way, that way, because either costs way too much money to follow a certain group of humans that is an adequate sample size over a long period of time, or you develop a pseudo society in which you actually have people sit in there and you can manipulate them and do these unethical experiments. If you ever watch Rick and Morty, it's like when Rick creates a small universe inside of his oh boy, the name escapes me right now, but in his travel portal, not portal gun, but his ship, he creates a society in order to create electricity. If you do something of that sort of nature, he creates a universe, sorry. If you do something of that sort of nature, maybe you could come in and say, hey, I manipulate these variables and this is what I saw, and you can conclude that way. However, they're publishing this article on CNN using an ecological study, and I'm pretty sure they probably don't know the difference between that. And so they have this, they list out like these different reasons why boys might tend to be better off than girls, and they list these as advantages as for how girls die more often under the age of 5. So they say it's fueled by reduced access to basic health care, more exposure to health risks, such as female genital mutilation, and then they say in India, for example, the rates of vaccinating girls are lower than that of boys. And so if you try to look and see the statement, they're pulling these statements out of air. There's not even in quotations. Above, they have a quotation from a professor of epidemiology from London, the Queen's Mary University of London Centre for Primary Care and Public Health. They have a quotation from her stating that girls have a statistic, perhaps evolutionary advantage over boys when it comes to survival. This seems to extend through women's childbearing ages, said lead researcher Valentina Galau. And so they have this thing that says, oh, they have advantages over women, but then you have the next paragraph that states, but women don't have this advantage. They have all these different things. They have these claims and these claims are not backed up by any sort of source. They're not backed up by any reputable paper. They're just out there. While the rest of the paper, it just quotes the study. So it seems as though the author was implying certain things that the reader may not know. So if you just took this at face value, I would see how you would believe it and believe certain things. The next bit, it just goes into how the study was done. They used UNICEF's database for child mortality worldwide, and then they used this gender inequality index in order to determine the mortality of this. They used this in their study. And now if you dive into the gender inequality index that they link to, it goes to the United Nations Development Program. And if you try to figure out what this gender inequality index is, it goes into saying that gender inequality measures three important aspects of human development. So gender inequality index measure these things. Reproductive health, measured by maternal mortality ratio and adolescent birth rates. I think that only applies to people who are women by sex. Next was empowerment. Again, this is gender inequalities. Empowerment measures by proportion of parliamentary seats occupied by females in proportion of adult females and males aged 25 years old or older with at least some secondary education. So they're layering on this sort of index by saying, oh, you need to have this parliamentary system. Now, let's suppose that you have this country, suppose you have Saudi Arabia, or you have a nation that's stuck in, the 1960s, and if you're going to use this empowerment portion of this gender equality index, what if this country or this nation doesn't have a parliament? What if this country only has a monarchy? Or let's say they're stuck in the 1960s and their society states that, or their culture states that men have this have more of a privilege. Wow, I'm trying to look for these words to sound correct. Or men have more of a privilege to actually serve in the seat of parliament. Or what about where women actually don't want to en masse? Maybe there's only a small minority of women who actually want to hold some sort of power in parliament. And what if other women look down upon this? That doesn't really go into it. So it doesn't really incorporate the actual society of whatever nation you're applying this gender inequality index towards. And then they also, in this empowerment section, they also include female male population with at least secondary education. And so that's like college and that sort of stuff. And so this is where you get the girl movement by Nike and all that other stuff to help educate women. Now, I believe women should be educated if they want to be. If the individual wants to be educated, then they should be allowed to. I mean, I don't think there is any reason why that person should not be education, because I believe education is what gives you your independence. Education is something that gives you your ability to think, critically think. It gives you freedom. Knowledge gives you power. You know that saying? And so, unless you're cynical and you just start saying stuff like, look at those thinking paintings where they show you how a person who's like standing on top of books is supposed to exemplify someone who's more knowledgeable, and then you look to their right and you start seeing a person who's sitting on a taller stack of books and exemplify that they have more knowledge. And so and then you see their facial expression. The guy who has the least amount of knowledge is happy, and then you start seeing like as they get older, or as they get wiser, or as they get more knowledgeable, they become more and more unhappy. I don't believe that's actually the case. That's just some guy who wanted to be edgy, or some girl who wanted to be edgy to make that drawing, and be like, oh, if you have more knowledge, then I guess you won't be so happy. Maybe it's something that person did in order for them to actually accept the fact that they weren't very knowledgeable and make themselves feel better. And so, but yeah, I digress from there. The next part about this is labor market. They include women who are female and male labor force participation rate. So this takes out housewives from this. Now, I for one believe in gender equality, and I personally, even though I have a medical degree, I am a doctor, I would prefer to be a house husband, because you don't have to work as hard, or perceivably as hard, in order for you to actually, be successful. One day I hope to marry a woman who's 20 times richer than me, so I don't have to work as hard. I'll just clean the house and take care of the kids. I'm happy with that. Anyways, back to this. So they use the Gender Inequality Index for this, and they use mortality rates of these people to measure 195 countries. First of all, 195 countries. That's not all the countries in the world, but that's almost like 95% of these countries. And you're going to measure these, you're going to assume that these databases are accurate. A lot of these countries where they have war, you have civil war, you have in countries like in Africa, or like the Congo where they have civil wars, they have constant conflicts, they have warlords. You're actually going to tell me that you have a mortality rate, an accurate measurement of that. Now, of course, you can estimate that by looking at the casualties and that sort of thing, but the reporting is not always that great. So you always had to look at the limitations of reporting. Even in America, our reporting isn't that great. I was trying to look in the other day how many people actually have hepatitis C due to opioid use, but that it was very difficult. So I was trying to correlate hepatitis C with injecting yourself with heroin, and how many people do that. Now it's on the rise. Hepatitis C is on the rise in America. It's kind of sort of making a comeback given the heroin epidemic. But so I was trying to see the statistics behind that, but it was very difficult because a lot of these are not reported. So you just get like a rudimentary report of this. But then going into this article a bit more, it starts saying that statistical models the team explored and associated between countries' male and female ratio under 5 mortality rates would show the probability of deaths per 100,000 births by sex and gender inequality. They found strong correlation between low levels of inequality and more young girls dying than they should, Gallo said. So I assume they're trying to correlate that boys should be dying at equal rates than girls if they're living in a lower socioeconomic country. So let's say like a third world country. I mean, I guess if you found that trend, there's a lot of factors that go into this, what's actually happening to these women when it happens, when they die. How do they die? I mean, it's not really telling us. Maybe these children are out to fend for themselves, so I'm not really sure. It just makes these claims and just say, we found this, but we don't know why. And so they come up with these reasons as to why, like a brainstorming group. The other experts warned against claiming against causation such as from such correlations and said more research is needed. bravo, finally you had something reasonable. And then the next part of this article goes into removing the evolutionary advantage. Worldwide, more boys are dying than girls. Worldwide. More boys are dying than girls. This is what they wrote. But low to middle income countries were found to have smaller difference. A lower male to female child mortality ratio, meaning that more girls are dying. So if you go from middle to lower income countries, you certainly see this shift. Okay, so what are the higher income countries doing? Are they just neglecting their boys? But their title just said gender inequality linked to deaths of girls under 5. I mean, there's no specificity. There's nothing being specific to the title. But anyways, on to the rest of this. A little bit later, it's stating it's not possible to estimate a natural or ideal rate of male to female child mortality ratio, but the study found that the ratio varies from 0.8 to 1.4, with the majority of countries having a rate of 1.2, equaling 120 boys dying for every 100 girls. Okay. That's towards the bottom of it. And then it goes into a little bit later. I mean, this is kind of infuriating how they just like start switching. It's like a bait and switch. You go into a shop, you saw a sale on TV saying that a car is for $500, and they get to there, it's all of a sudden $2,000. They're like sitting there bait and switching you. And then they have a next section that says, can't infer causation from correlation. I'm just like done with this article. But I mean, if you want to read for yourself, go right ahead. But I just made this so to exemplify the reason as to why I started this podcast. Because I was reading this sort of stuff, it became kind of annoying because you read something and it'd be like, oh, all of a sudden it could, and it became, well, more boys overall are dying than female. Well, I mean, child mortality is bad in itself. I mean, we don't want children to die. Maybe if adults die for their, I don't know, it's not as bad, I guess. I don't know. Death in general is just bad. I mean, I became a doctor in order to stop death. I mean, I know it's not a actual possible thing, but still, I mean, child mortality is bad. But when we try to say that one's bad worse than the other, I don't know what to say. I mean, I just want to get this down to 0. Child mortality should be down to 0. They also have this little picture here that they, I don't know, put in here saying, related article, women are dying from backstreet abortions, but reforms to Malawi's 157-year-old laws are struck. I mean, if they're getting backstreet abortions, I think that this country has a little bit more